Hello everyone, welcome back. It's Space Engineers Plus Me, episode 38. I'm Enigmius, and today we've got progress all over the place. It's not necessarily the most exciting progress, it's the kind of things you have to do before it looks interesting kinds of progress. So we're going to take a look at what that looks like. And then I'm hoping in the next episode we're going to have some really jaw-dropping, holy cow, I didn't even think you could do that in this game kind of progress. So what we've got here, what we're looking at is a very simple purpose-built ship that's designed to mimic this configuration here, which is going to change. I see, I guess one of the things that I just discovered is that this has to change so that I can test the gantry up there that's going to be handling the raising and lowering of this track here, which is going to be holding the gondola that's going to be holding the drills. So there's a system that we're putting into place here, and it starts with the gantry up here, and you can see already we've got a projector hologram in place that's also going to change. But so much testing, so many things that we've been doing, so many different bits and pieces, so many different ships, that it made a lot of sense to me to have just a very small, very simple ship that I could do some testing with, as opposed to trying to move this whole thing up and down and line it up on two sides of the gantry. Wow, that would have been such a pain in the ass. We're going to come up here and take a look at this guy. Now, the whole idea is that this frame is going to do basically two things. It's going to hold the tabs that hold up the frame, that hold the track, that hold the gondola, that hold the drills, perfectly lined up, so that rather than using pistons to raise and lower it, it actually modifies the frame whenever you want to lower it to add a block that increases its length and then lowers it down. Voila. The benefit to something like that is that as long as you've got materials to keep adding segments to that tab, you can continue lowering the drills for as long as you want. You could theoretically go right through the entire planet if that's what you wanted to do. You'd see a lot of stone. There's no doubt about that. And it's quite possible that as you started to get farther and farther down, the vibrations on the drills would have more and more torque and probably shred itself long before it ever got all the way through. But the concept of being able to infinitely expand the frame is basically what I was going for, and without using any pistons, which is kind of the fantastic part. The other thing that it's supposed to do is hold the frame, that tab, in place so that the welders and the grinders can do their thing. That's the tricky part that I've run into a little bit of difficulty with. We're going to talk specifically about why that's not necessarily working, but you can see here my first attempt at making the whole thing work, and actually finding out that the top part of the tab, the part that we end up doing the work to modify, to extend it, wasn't perfectly lined up with the projector, so it didn't weld properly. And even if it hadn't not welded the blocks in the places where there were supposed to be things, it would have been detached anyway, so it was kind of screwed. So that was our first attempt. We did a few more attempts with a few more changes since then, but ultimately I realized that we were going about it kind of all wrong. Basically what we're looking at. So the way it works, based on the current setup that you can see now with this hologram, is that the first thing it would do, you can see here, this is you barely see it because it's yellow and it's on a light background. We've got the connector here that's going to allow us to connect to the frame of the Atlas so that we can transfer the ore and the ice that we're getting from our mining operations off of the whole mining assembly and into the Atlas for storage. We need to get rid of that. So the first thing, we have a grinder right here that grinds this off. And then we've got two more grinders, both in the back here. One here. There's a grinder. And there's a grinder on the other side. And they grind these two blast door edges off. This one right here. And this one right here. Now there's a hole here and a hole here. And the whole frame can slide down one block, and there's actually a sensor here that when this block is ground off, it triggers the sensor, and the sensor turns off all of the grinders so that as the frame is falling down, we're not continuing to grind things that we don't want to grind anymore. So basically we're left with a frame that's got no connector here. It's just got an empty spot and a bunch of empty spots along the top. Then we've got these two welders. In the place where the connector was, this connector here, it's now fallen down to here. It gets welded into a regular tube by this welder. A new connector gets welded in place by this welder. And then these blocks up top, all three, the blast edges, the light armor block, and the blast door edge, get welded on. And it's basically a brand new tab, exactly the way it was before we started grinding and welding. But there's one extra segment with the light armor block and a connector, a conveyor tube in its place. Conceptually, it's not really all that complicated. It's actually quite simple, exactly what we're doing and how we're making it work. The difficulty is in the little technical details, specifically, like I said, getting everything lined up and held into place properly so that all of the grinders and the welders line up with what we want. So that's the goal that I'm going to be working towards. So basically the change that I've been talking about is instead of having a single column of light armor blocks with the conveyor tubes sitting on top, it's going to be 3 wide. There's going to be a column of light armor blocks here and a column of light armor blocks on the other side, and the conveyor tubes are going to run down the middle. And what this is going to allow us to do is have a wider surface where I can get some purchase with the tires here to hold them in place. It's not too difficult holding them in place side to side with the setup that we've got here. That works fairly well. But with just the 1 wide kind of setup, trying to get these tires, see, it doesn't even cover the whole block. We're basically looking at it head on, and these tires basically kind of catch the edge of the tubes and maybe a third of the light armor blocks in terms of the width. So if we make this whole setup wider, 3 wide instead of 1, we can put another pair of tires on the other side and get lots and lots of push. That's the technical term. Lots and lots of pressure, if we wanted it, applied to the whole thing so that it holds in place, it lines up with the projector, all of the welding and the grinding take place on the right blocks at the right time, and everything is good. So powering this whole thing, making everything sort of trigger and sequence, is the command center. This is just a temporary thing up here. We've got 3 timer blocks that all kind of reference one another and sort of trigger and make things happen at a certain interval, working in conjunction with the sensor down here to turn off the grinders at the appropriate time. Now this frame, this whole big frame that I've set up here to help test this whole system, is just temporary. Really what we're looking at is this setup right here. We're not going to be making a frame like this on the Atlas. We're just going to be taking a look at the Gantry setup, this specific mechanized area here, and duplicating that down on the edges of the Atlas 2, maybe 3 times. And those will be holding the drilling rig on one side and then do it again on the other side. So it'll be basically, you could have 2 sides of the Atlas drilling at the same time if you wanted. So we're not worried about adding this giant construction, but this is a really simple, easy way so that I can set up something to test, and if things go absolutely wonky and things start falling off and destroying things underneath, it's not destroying the Atlas, because you can see we're making progress about as quickly on the Atlas as we are over here. So we've got this frame down here, which is waiting. It's patiently waiting for us to finalize the system that's going to be at work up there and then transferring it down here. But again, it's very, very simple. I neglected to mention in the last episode, now that I just remembered, it's a good time to point out. The one thing that I didn't point out is this beam here that we've got. Wow. And this damage that we got from somewhere, even though we haven't been using this guy since the last episode. You can see we've got this beam that runs basically the entire length here underneath the wheels. So this thing is basically sitting on the wheels on the top of the track, and then the beam actually runs in a groove underneath the track so that things kind of stay straight as it's moving back and forth. It doesn't really have as much opportunity to veer off to the sides, which could be catastrophic if we were allowed it to do that. So it was just something that I realized after the last episode I didn't point out, is that we had that thing, and which I knew where this damage came from. But it doesn't matter. We'll do a pass before we put it back into service, make sure everything's in tip-top shape. So This guy is basically going to be what's dangling off the side of the Atlas. Once we've got the gantries in place, the gantries will be holding something like this. And then we've got the track, we've got support for this is actually going to be a ship, believe it or not. It's going to be a ship so that you can fly it into place, hook it onto the gantries, and then basically just leave it from then on. But when you're done, you'll be able to remove the ship from the gantries and then probably either dismantle the ship or connect it to the Atlas with merge blocks so that you can move it around. Relative to the idea of stringing together 15 to 20 pistons and having to grind them all off and then put them back on every time you want to move the damn thing, be a much easier solution. But it's not going to be complicated. The idea is to keep it as simple as possible. So if we do decide that we want to just grind it all down and rebuild it, we can do that without driving ourselves nuts. So we made the little ship here. We started on the actual proper track ship here. We're testing the gantry. We've got some ideas on how to improve it. This little guy, we have to fix it. We have to go over it with a fine-tooth comb and repair the damage. And the Atlas has got... the upper deck is basically in place. It's got openings here for more hydrogen tanks that'll be stacked on top of the hydrogen tanks that are underneath. We've got openings for storage, for our storage, where however we want to attach the gantries later on and be able to connect them to our storage, we've got openings there to support that. If we want to close those off later, we can. And we're just basically waiting for the final bits that we have to do. The assemblers that we still have to add are probably going to go in this area here. The main area up front will be for our pressurized bridge, if you want to call it that. And then we'll be doing some cosmetic detailing around the outside. We're not going to be leaving it just a gray side with the windows. We're going to be doing something similar to this around the outside there. So very busy. We've got many things underway. I wish I could have shown you something a little bit more complete, but there's a lot going on up there for such a simple system that we have to get figured out before we're going to have it complete. So the next episode, you're going to see some progress in this. If it's not working yet, it's going to look much different and it's going to be much closer to working. And then we'll probably do a little bit more down here, maybe even do a little more on the Atlas. So if you want to be notified when I add that, you can always subscribe to my channel. You can follow me on social media. Links for social media are in the information box below the video. Feel free to leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.